What happens when a successful architect, consumed by his career, faces an unexpected turn of events that forces him to reevaluate everything? A fateful encounter with a woman who once caught his eye but never got his respect, a daughter whose love he almost lost, and a moment that could change their lives forever. Can he truly change, or is he too far gone? Join us on this emotional journey of love, regret, and second chances in our latest story. You won't believe what happens next. Hit subscribe and stay tuned for a twist you won't see coming. This is a story you won't want to miss. The sun dipped low over the Seattle skyline, casting a warm, amber glow across the buildings and streets as the late afternoon began to slip into early evening. The city pulsed with life. Cars honked impatiently, their red brake lights flickering like fireflies in the fading light, while pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, their steps echoing off glass storefronts and concrete. The air carried the faint, familiar scent of roasted coffee beans from a cafe nearby, mingling with the occasional hint of rain-soaked pavement still lingering from a morning drizzle. Ethan wove his way through the crowd with long, purposeful strides, clutching his tablet in one hand and holding onto his daughter Lily's tiny hand with the other. The little girl, no more than 6 years old, skipped beside him, trying to match her father's pace, her backpack bouncing slightly with each step. Her wavy brown hair, tied in two uneven pigtails, shimmered in the sunlight, and in her other hand she carried a small sketchbook, a prized possession filled with colorful crayon doodles and a few surprisingly detailed drawings for her age. "Come on, sweetie," Ethan said, glancing briefly at his watch. "We're gonna make it if we hustle a bit more." "But Dad, my legs are shorter than yours," Lily pouted, dragging her feet dramatically. Ethan chuckled softly, squeezing her hand. "Point taken. But if we're late again, Miss Carmichael might ban me from drop-off duty forever. And then what will I do with all that free time, huh?" "You'll probably just go back to your office and draw more boring buildings," she replied cheekily, tilting her head up to look at him with a grin. "Hey, they're not boring," he said with mock offense, finally slowing his pace just a little. "They're modern, sustainable, and award-winning." Lily giggled and skipped ahead a few steps, then turned and walked backward, still facing her father. "I'd rather draw people and trees and flying cats. That's way more fun." "You might be onto something," Ethan muttered, distracted now as his eyes fell back to the tablet in his hand. The screen glowed faintly with the render of an unfinished project, a sleek community center with a living roof, something he'd been obsessing over for weeks. As they neared a busy intersection, his attention flickered between the real world and the digital blueprints in front of him. The city was alive around them. A street musician strummed a guitar near the corner. A food cart vendor called out daily specials. The light rail rumbled above them on elevated tracks. Ethan barely noticed. His mind was split between where he was and where he thought he needed to be, between Lily's art class and the pitch he had to finalize for tomorrow morning. He stopped momentarily at a crosswalk, waiting for the pedestrian signal to change. Lily tugged on his arm, pointing to a mural painted across a nearby wall. "Dad, look, there's a rainbow dragon. That wasn't there last time." Ethan looked up briefly, gave a distracted nod. "It's beautiful, Lil. Remind me to take a picture of it later, okay?" "Okay," she replied, a little disappointed at his half-hearted response. When the light turned green, they continued down the sidewalk, weaving through the afterwork crowd. Ethan's eyes kept drifting back to the design on his tablet, his thumb zooming in and out on roof sections and facade details. He muttered to himself under his breath, adjusting something in the model with a flick of his stylus, completely oblivious to the skateboard abandoned just ahead, lying across the path. And so the stage was set. One man torn between ambition and fatherhood, one little girl caught in the quiet spaces of his love, and a city that never paused to notice the small fates it helped shape. Ethan Harper had built a name for himself in the competitive world of urban design. His architectural firm, Harper & Co., was steadily gaining attention for projects that blended minimalism with environmental consciousness. Awards lined one wall of his sleek downtown office: a Green Space Award for his eco-housing project, a feature in Architectural Digest, and a framed article that dubbed him Seattle's visionary builder. Yet for all the accolades and client praise, there were times when Ethan couldn't help but feel like he was missing something crucial, something softer, less tangible. Work had a gravitational pull on him. He often arrived at the office before the sun rose and left long after Lily had gone to bed, her sketchbooks waiting for his attention, her drawings of stick-figure families tacked to the fridge, conspicuously missing his presence. His phone was always buzzing: emails, calendar reminders, Slack messages from his junior designers. Even when he was physically home, his mind stayed in blueprints, calculations, zoning laws. He had told himself many times that he was working for Lily, for her future, for stability, for opportunities he never had as a child. After his wife passed away from a sudden illness 3 years ago, he had thrown himself into his work, convinced that building something enduring in the world was the only way to hold back the grief. And in doing so, he had begun to distance himself from the very thing that mattered most: his daughter. He wasn't indifferent to Lily, far from it. He adored her. He kissed her forehead every morning, made her pancakes on Sundays, and filled her bookshelf with art supplies and storybooks. But when it came to being truly present, Ethan often fell short. He forgot her teacher's name more than once. He missed a class play because of a client meeting that ran long. At the last parent-teacher conference, he had arrived 15 minutes late and hadn't remembered to bring the cookies he promised. Other parents noticed. So did Olivia, who had volunteered to help organize the event. He still remembered the disapproving look she'd given him as he scanned his phone while she spoke about building stronger connections between parents and students. He had offered a half-hearted comment afterward, something about how it was great that some people had the time for that sort of thing. The moment her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, he knew he'd said the wrong thing. But instead of apologizing, he'd nodded and walked away, already distracted by a call from his office. When it came to parenting, Ethan often felt like he was building a structure without blueprints. There was no clear design, no foolproof plan. He knew how to construct steel frameworks and integrate rainwater systems, but how to navigate the emotional needs of a grieving child who missed her mother? That remained the one project he couldn't sketch out or revise with a stylus. Still, he tried in his own quiet way. He left little notes in her lunchbox with doodles of smiling suns. He let her stay up late on Friday nights to watch old animated films. He asked about her art, even if he didn't always understand it. But more often than not, his efforts were uneven, like beams without support. On that particular day, rushing through the city with Lily's hand in his, Ethan thought he was doing enough. He had managed to leave work early for him at least. He'd remembered to pack Lily's colored pencils. He felt momentarily like maybe he was getting the hang of this, of balancing deadlines with bedtime stories. But life, like architecture, rarely followed the original design. As they continued down the bustling sidewalk, the city hummed around them. Buses exhaled at stops, crosswalk signals blinked urgently, and voices blended into a kind of urban symphony. Ethan's hand still held Lily's loosely, but his eyes were locked onto the screen of his tablet, his mind pulled deep into the intricacies of his latest project. The design was nearly perfect, but something about the skylight angles still nagged at him. He zoomed in, tapped through layers of elevation, adjusted a corner with the stylus. The world around him faded into peripheral noise. "Dad, you're not looking," Lily said, trying to pull him toward a storefront with colorful wind chimes dangling in the window. "Just a sec, honey. Almost done," Ethan muttered, not looking up. They walked like that, him distracted, her half dragging her backpack, until it happened in a blink. There, lying haphazardly across the sidewalk, was a skateboard, its black grip tape worn, one wheel slightly tilted as if it had been left mid-trick. It had been abandoned near a bike rack, camouflaged by shadows and the frantic rhythm of the crowd. Ethan didn't see it. His foot caught the edge just as he took another step forward. His body lurched awkwardly, a gasp caught in his throat. He stumbled hard, momentum carrying him forward. The tablet slipped from his hand, spinning through the air in slow motion before smashing face down on the concrete. The stylus clattered beside it. Ethan's knee buckled, and then his lower back struck the edge of a nearby concrete bench with a sickening thud. A strangled groan escaped his lips as he crumpled to the ground, pain radiating instantly through his spine. "Daddy," Lily shrieked, dropping her sketchbook and rushing to his side, her voice high and trembling. "Daddy, are you okay?" Ethan tried to sit up, but a sharp pain seized his lower back, making it nearly impossible to breathe normally. His jaw tightened. His vision swam for a moment. I'm okay," he gasped, more to calm her than out of certainty. "Just give me a minute." The pain wasn't just a bruise. It was something deeper, sharper, a bolt of fire along his spine that made his breath catch every time he moved. His hands trembled as he tried to push himself upright, but his muscles refused to cooperate. The tablet lay nearby, its screen shattered like a spider web of light. Ethan saw it out of the corner of his eye but couldn't reach it. A small crowd had begun to gather. Some people slowed down, murmuring to one another, but no one stepped forward. City life had made onlookers cautious, distant. Lily knelt beside him, her tiny fingers curling around his arm. "Daddy, it's broken. Your tablet. It's broken," she whispered, on the verge of tears, not just from the fall but from seeing her usually unshakable father so suddenly fragile. Ethan closed his eyes, his breathing shallow, trying to will the pain into submission. But he couldn't ignore the alarm bells ringing in his body. And then from behind them, a calm, steady voice rose above the noise. "Don't move him. He might have hurt his spine." He opened his eyes to see a familiar face, a woman kneeling down, her brows knit in concern. Her hospital ID still clipped to her scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a quick bun. "Olivia." Their eyes locked for half a second. Her expression was focused, clinical, but behind it there was recognition, and perhaps something else, the faintest hint of hesitation born from history. Olivia Bennett had just stepped out of the sliding doors of Harborview Medical Center, the faint scent of antiseptic still clinging to her scrubs. Her 12-hour shift had left her legs aching and her mind foggy, but there was a strange kind of quiet that always came after the chaos, a stillness that let her breathe a little more deeply, even in the middle of a city that never stopped moving. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and began the familiar walk toward the light rail, her canvas tote slung over one shoulder. She was only a block away from the station when she saw it happen. Just ahead, a man walking with a child, eyes buried in his screen, oblivious to the skateboard lying on the sidewalk. Her instincts kicked in the moment his foot hit the board. The fall was sharp, sudden. The way his back struck the edge of the bench made her wince. The little girl screamed, the tablet shattered, and the man, he didn't move. Olivia was already jogging toward them before the small crowd started forming. As she drew closer, recognition bloomed like a slow burn in her chest. "Ethan Harper. Of all people." She crouched beside him without hesitation, her voice immediately calm and direct. "Don't try to move. You might have injured your spine." Her eyes flicked to his face, scanning his pallor, the tension in his jaw, the shallow breaths. Ethan looked up at her, pain etched deep in his features. It took him a moment to place her, not as the nurse who had seen 100 patients today, but as someone he'd crossed paths with before, under very different circumstances. "Olivia," he managed, the name catching awkwardly in his throat. She gave a small nod, already checking his pulse with a practiced hand. "Looks like it's my turn to save the day," she said evenly, not quite smiling. Memories surfaced for both of them. The last parent-teacher meeting at Greenwood Elementary, standing awkwardly near the snack table while Olivia spoke passionately about the school's new art therapy initiative. Ethan had barely looked up from his phone. When asked for thoughts, he had offered a dismissive, "It's nice that people can volunteer their time like that. Some of us are just too busy with real work, I guess." The silence that followed had been sharp enough to cut glass. Olivia hadn't forgotten. Still, here she was, kneeling beside him in the middle of a crowded sidewalk, checking his vitals while the little girl clutched at his jacket, on the verge of tears. She glanced at Lily, her tone softening. "Hey, sweetheart, what's your name?" Lily," the girl stammered, blinking up at her. "Is my daddy going to be okay?" Olivia smiled gently, brushing Lily's hair away from her face. "I think he just had a pretty bad fall, but I'm going to call for help and we'll make sure he's all right. Okay." Lily nodded, her small hand still gripping Ethan's sleeve tightly. As Olivia reached for her phone to dial 911, Ethan forced out a breath and said hoarsely, "You didn't have to stop." Her eyes flicked down to him, unreadable. "Yes, I did," she replied quietly, pressing the call button. "Whether or not you think what I do is real work." Ethan closed his eyes again, not from pain this time, but from the unmistakable sting of shame. Olivia's fingers moved with the precision of someone who had done this 100 times before. The moment she saw Ethan wince with every shallow breath and struggle to shift even slightly on the pavement, her mind clicked into clinical mode, pushing aside the awkward history between them. This wasn't the man who had once insulted her during a school meeting. This was a patient in potential distress and a child's father. "Ethan, can you hear me?" she asked, leaning in so her voice cut through the surrounding noise. Her tone was clear and steady, the kind that brought people back from panic. "I need you to stay completely still. Don't try to sit up or turn. Can you tell me where it hurts the most?" "Lower back," he ground out, his breath hitching mid-sentence. "Can't breathe, right?" His words came in short, clipped bursts, the kind Olivia recognized all too well. It wasn't just the fall. The way his chest rose unevenly, the way he winced at even the slightest movement, it sent red flags waving in her head. Possibility of spinal trauma, maybe fractured ribs, worse, maybe a punctured lung. She crouched closer, shielding his face from the crowd that had begun to grow. Some people filmed with their phones from a distance, others just stared. "All right, listen to me, Ethan. You might have a spinal injury or possibly something affecting your lungs. That's why it's hard to breathe. I need you to stay awake and not move. Can you do that?" He gave a barely perceptible nod, eyes glassy but locked onto hers, as if grounding himself in her calmness. Olivia pulled her phone from her tote bag and hit the emergency number with practiced speed. "This is Olivia Bennett, registered nurse. I've got a male in his 30s, possible spinal trauma, difficulty breathing following a fall, corner of Pine and 5th. Requesting ambulance immediately. Patient conscious but unstable." As she spoke, she placed one hand gently near Ethan's shoulder, not to move him but to reassure him. "I've got you," she said once the call ended. "Help is on the way, just keep your eyes open." Lily had gone quiet, watching everything with wide, frightened eyes. Her hand still clung to Ethan, but now she looked up at Olivia, her small voice trembling. "He's gonna be okay, right?" Olivia turned toward her, her voice softening. "We're doing everything right. You're being so brave. What you can do right now is talk to your dad. Keep telling him you're here. That helps more than you know." Lily nodded, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. She leaned close to her father's ear. "I'm right here, Daddy. I won't go anywhere." Ethan closed his eyes again, whether from pain or emotion, Olivia couldn't tell. But he stayed conscious, breathing in slow, shallow sips, hanging on. She stayed by his side, scanning the street for the wail of an approaching siren. Moments like this, these fragile windows between chaos and help arriving, were where Olivia thrived. She didn't hesitate, didn't waver. Whatever had passed between them before no longer mattered. Right now he needed her, and she knew exactly what to do. As the seconds crawled by, the scene around them seemed to blur into a haze of noise and movement. But for Lily, everything had gone eerily still. She stared at her father lying motionless on the ground, his face pale, eyes barely open, chest rising and falling in quick, uneven rhythms. The sight cracked something inside her. Then she saw the tablet, the one her father always carried, the one with all his drawings and important work stuff. It lay on the concrete just a few feet away, screen shattered into a jagged mosaic. In her young mind, that broken screen seemed symbolic, like her father's strength had shattered with it. And suddenly, she couldn't hold it in any more. A sharp sob escaped her lips, followed by another, and then she was crying in earnest, loud gulping sobs that turned heads in the crowd. Her small shoulders shook as she clutched at Ethan's arm, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daddy, Daddy, wake up, you dropped it. Your tablet's broken, it's broken." Her voice cracked with fear and guilt, as if somehow she believed the fall and the broken tablet were her fault. Olivia turned quickly, instinctively reaching out. She had seen children cry in hospitals before, out of pain, fear, or confusion. But this was something else. This was raw panic, the terrifying helplessness of a child watching the one constant in her world suddenly become fragile. "Hey, Lily," Olivia said gently, crouching down so her eyes met the little girl's. Her voice dropped into the low, soothing cadence she used with patients and frightened children. "Sweetheart, look at me. Your dad is hurt, but he's awake and the ambulance is on the way. He's going to get the help he needs." Lily sniffled, her sobs slowing just enough for her to hiccup a few times. "But he's not. He's not talking right. And the tablet, it's broken." Olivia didn't dismiss the tablet. She understood. Sometimes children anchored their fears to something they could understand. The tablet wasn't just glass and metal to Lily. It was a symbol of her father's presence, his connection to the world, and now it lay shattered. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a pack of tissues, handing one to Lily. "Things can break, Lily, but people, we take care of them. And your dad, he's got a nurse with him right now, and in just a few minutes there'll be a whole team helping him. You did such a good job staying calm and staying by his side." "I wasn't calm," Lily mumbled, wiping her face. "I was just scared." Olivia smiled softly. "It's okay to be scared. You still stayed with him, that's brave." Lily looked over at Ethan again, her fingers tightening around the tissue. "Will he be mad about the tablet?" Olivia shook her head, her voice warm and firm. "No, sweetie. He'll be glad that you're safe and that you stayed with him. That's all that matters right now." She gently brushed a hand over Lily's back, feeling the tremble in her small body begin to subside. The girl leaned against Olivia without thinking, instinctively seeking comfort, and Olivia let her, wrapping one arm around her protectively as the sirens finally began to echo down the street. Together they waited. One little girl, frightened but no longer alone, and one woman who, despite everything in their past, had chosen to kneel beside them when it mattered most. As the ambulance doors closed with a heavy thud and the paramedics prepared to rush Ethan to the hospital, Olivia remained crouched beside Lily, who now stood frozen on the sidewalk, her tear-streaked face tilted up toward the flashing red and blue lights. The little girl's fingers clung to the strap of her backpack like it was a lifeline, her other hand wrapped around Olivia. One of the EMTs, an older man with a kind voice, approached Olivia quickly. "He's stable enough for transport, but someone's going to need to take care of the girl. Do you have contact info for family?" Olivia nodded. "He has a mother. She lives in Oregon. I'll try her first." She pulled out her phone again, her hands slightly shaky now that the adrenaline had begun to ebb. She scrolled through the school contact app where emergency information was stored. Ethan Harper. Emergency contact listed as Margaret Harper, mother. She hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice, finally a click. "Hello," an older woman's voice answered, uncertain. "Hi, Mrs. Harper, this is Olivia Bennett. I was at the scene of an accident involving your son, Ethan. He had a bad fall. He's stable and on his way to the hospital now, but I have Lily with me." "Oh my God," the woman gasped, her voice immediately strained. "Is he? How bad is it? Is Lily hurt?" "Lily's fine, just shaken up," Olivia assured her. "But Ethan's going to need some time in the ER. We need someone to stay with Lily until he's out." I wish I could," Margaret said, her voice cracking. "But I'm in Portland. I can't get there until at least tomorrow. There's no one else close by." Olivia glanced down at Lily, who was now sitting on the curb, hugging her knees and staring at the sidewalk as if she could will her father to reappear. "No, there's no one else here," Olivia said, softer now. "But I can stay with her tonight if that's okay. I used to live in their building. Lily knows me. It's just until someone else can come." There was a pause, filled only by the buzz of traffic and the fading sirens in the distance. "I remember you," Margaret said slowly. "You helped Lily after her first week of school when Ethan was still adjusting." Olivia gave a small, surprised laugh. "Yeah, I brought her homemade cookies and she refused to eat them because they didn't look like Oreos." Margaret chuckled faintly on the other end. "Yes, that's Lily. If you don't mind keeping her for the night, I'd be grateful. I'll leave at first light." "I've got her," Olivia promised. After hanging up, she approached Lily gently. "Hey, sweet pea, your grandma is coming tomorrow, but she can't get here tonight. So how about you come hang out with me for a little while, just until your dad feels better, okay?" Lily hesitated, chewing her lip. "Will I get to see him tomorrow?" "As soon as he's feeling stronger, yes," Olivia said, kneeling to Lily's level. "I'll even help you make a card if you want, maybe with glitter." Lily looked up at her. "You have glitter?" "I have too much glitter," Olivia grinned. Lily finally gave a small nod, her trust not given easily, but earned through Olivia's calm presence and warm patience. Olivia held out her hand. "Let's go home, kiddo." And with that, Lily stood, slipped her hand into Olivia's, and together they walked away from the flashing lights, toward a small, familiar apartment filled with the quiet kind of care that doesn't need grand gestures to be felt. Olivia's apartment sat on the second floor of a quiet, tree-lined street just a few blocks from where Ethan and Lily used to live. It wasn't big, but it was full of warmth, the kind that didn't come from expensive furniture or flawless decor, but from thoughtful little details. Potted plants on the windowsill, soft yellow lamplight instead of harsh overhead bulbs, a woven throw blanket draped over the couch like an old friend waiting to be wrapped around someone. When Olivia unlocked the door and gently nudged it open, Lily hesitated in the hallway, clutching the strap of her backpack like a shield. She looked up into the softly lit apartment with eyes that were still red from crying, still wary, still holding the kind of exhaustion only a child who'd seen too much in one day could wear. "You can leave your shoes right here," Olivia said, pointing to a small mat near the door, her tone casual, comforting. "And there's a bathroom down the hall if you want to wash your face. I'm going to make us something warm. You like soup?" Lily gave a hesitant shrug. "What kind?" "Carrot and ginger," Olivia replied. "But with noodles. I always add noodles because otherwise it's too grown-up and boring." That earned the smallest twitch of a smile from Lily. She wandered slowly into the living room while Olivia disappeared into the kitchen. The space smelled faintly of lavender and something lemony clean. On the coffee table sat a half-finished jigsaw puzzle. A bookshelf nearby held rows of novels and children's books stacked together. The Velveteen Rabbit beside a medical textbook. Anne of Green Gables leaning against a binder labeled Nursing CEU credits. It was the kind of home that lived in layers. In the kitchen, Olivia worked quickly and quietly. She heated the soup she'd frozen the week before, added a handful of egg noodles, and stirred gently, letting the scent fill the space. She peeked into the living room to find Lily standing in front of a small easel near the window, staring at a blank sheet of paper and a tin of colored pencils beside it. "You can draw if you'd like," Olivia called out gently. "Or I can join you after dinner. I have some glitter pens too, but only if you promise not to tell my coworkers I use them for stress relief." Lily turned around slowly. "You really have glitter pens?" "I have them in 4 colors," Olivia said, dramatically lowering her voice like it was a top-secret confession. "One of them sparkles in the dark." Lily walked over to the easel, picked up a pencil, and began to sketch in quiet, careful strokes. After a few minutes, Olivia brought over 2 bowls of soup and set them on the small table by the couch. Lily looked at hers curiously. "You cut the carrots into stars," she said, her voice soft. Olivia shrugged, smiling. "Stars make everything taste better." They ate in silence at first, the kind of silence that wasn't heavy but necessary. A moment to breathe. Lily took small sips, then larger ones, until she was nearly halfway through her bowl. "Do you think Daddy's awake now?" she asked, not looking up. "Maybe," Olivia said gently. "And if not now, then very soon. The doctors are taking good care of him." Lily nodded slowly, pushing a noodle around her bowl. "He works a lot, but he always picks me up after class if he can." "I know," Olivia replied. "He tries really hard, and he loves you so much." That seemed to soothe something in Lily. She didn't answer, but her shoulders relaxed just a little. After dinner, Olivia brought over the glitter pens, and the two of them sat on the floor near the coffee table. Lily drew a picture of her father lying in a hospital bed, a heart floating over his chest, and herself standing beside him holding a card that said, "I'm here." Olivia didn't comment. She just handed Lily the gold glitter pen and smiled. By the time night fell, Lily had curled up on the couch beneath the woven blanket, her sketchbook tucked under one arm, her breathing slow and steady. Olivia sat nearby with a cup of tea, watching the girls sleep as the city lights blinked softly through the window. In that quiet moment, surrounded by broken routines and unexpected kindness, something fragile began to mend. The room was still when Ethan stirred, the sterile hum of fluorescent lights above him blending with the distant beeping of monitors. The smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils before he even opened his eyes, and for a moment he wasn't sure where he was, only that his back ached, his throat was dry, and everything felt heavy. Then came the pain, a dull, insistent throb in his lower spine, like someone had wedged a hot iron between his vertebrae. He grimaced, shifting slightly, only to feel the pressure of a brace around his torso, snug but not suffocating. He blinked against the harsh light and slowly turned his head. White walls, IV pole, a heart monitor, hospital. A wave of panic surged through the fog in his mind, not for himself. "Lily," he croaked, his voice rasping from dryness and sedation. "Where's Lily?" A nurse standing by the vitals monitor turned at once. She was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a clipboard tucked under one arm. She immediately stepped to his side, pressing a button to elevate the head of his bed a few inches. "You're in recovery, Mr. Harper. You've been here for a couple of hours. Try not to move too much. You had a bad fall and some spinal bruising. We're monitoring you closely, but you're stable now." He swallowed, barely registering her words. "Lily," he said again, this time louder. "My daughter, she was with me. She saw me fall. Where is she?" The nurse offered a reassuring smile, the kind that held both empathy and authority. "She's safe. A woman named Olivia Bennett brought her in when the paramedics arrived. She stayed with Lily until she was calm enough to go with her. Ms. Bennett said she knows you, apparently used to be your neighbor. She took Lily home with her for the night after calling your mother. Your daughter's in good hands." Ethan's head fell back against the pillow, eyes closing as the tension released from his chest in one long exhale. "Olivia," he murmured, surprised not just by the name, but by the unexpected weight of gratitude it now carried. The last time he'd seen her, he'd left her standing in a school hallway with a look of quiet disappointment on her face. He hadn't imagined their next encounter would involve a cracked spine, a panicked daughter, and her being the one person to show up when it mattered most. She stayed with Lily, he asked, still not quite believing it. She didn't hesitate, the nurse said, gently adjusting his IV. And your daughter seemed to trust her right away. Olivia even packed a bag of Lily's things from your emergency contact file before leaving. She seemed calm, capable. Ethan let the words settle, his mind turning over the image of Lily holding Olivia's hand, walking away from the flashing ambulance lights. Safe, comforted, not alone. A quiet ache settled in his chest, not physical, not something the doctors could treat. It was the ache of knowing someone else had shown up for his daughter when he physically couldn't. The ache of knowing how little he'd earned it. He stared at the ceiling, the faint reflection of the heart monitor blinking in his periphery. "Can I call her?" he asked. "In a little while," the nurse replied. "Let's get some fluids in you first, then we'll get you a phone." Ethan nodded faintly, but his thoughts were already elsewhere, on a small girl in pigtails and a woman with steady hands, whose presence had somehow become the only calm point in the chaos. Later that evening, propped up against crisp hospital pillows, Ethan held a hospital-issued phone to his ear with fingers still tingling from the IV drip. The pain meds dulled the ache in his back, but nothing could quite quiet the storm in his chest. Not guilt, not gratitude, not the weight of everything left unsaid. The line rang only once before it was picked up. "Olivia Bennett," came the voice on the other end, clear, calm, familiar. Ethan exhaled shakily. "Hey, it's me, Ethan." There was a pause, not cold, just assessing. "I figured you call," she replied gently. In the background, he could hear faint children's music playing, soft laughter, Lily's. It nearly brought tears to his eyes. "She's okay?" he asked immediately, not bothering with small talk. "She's fine," Olivia said, and he could practically hear her smile through the phone. "She's drawing a picture of a flying giraffe, with armor." He let out a laugh, half relief, half emotion. "That sounds like her." Another pause, this one softer. "Thank you, Olivia," Ethan said finally, his voice catching despite himself. "I mean it. You didn't have to stop, you didn't have to stay, but you did. And I can't stop thinking about what could have happened if you hadn't been there." There was no reply at first, just the sound of her slow, steady breath. "I know I haven't exactly been the most thoughtful person, and I remember what I said at that parent meeting, about your work, about volunteering. I don't think I ever really apologized. I was a jerk." She didn't immediately respond. For a moment, all he heard was the faint clink of a glass being set down, maybe the rustle of her sweater sleeve as she adjusted her phone. "You were a little arrogant," she admitted, but her tone wasn't accusatory, just honest. "But I've worked in hospitals long enough to know people don't always mean what they say, especially when they're hurting or overwhelmed." Ethan's voice dropped, quiet. "It wasn't an excuse. I just didn't see the value in what you were doing. Not because it wasn't valuable, but because I didn't understand it. I didn't let myself." She didn't fill the silence right away, and he didn't rush her. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. "You know, it takes a lot for someone to say that, especially someone like you." He gave a small, rueful laugh. "Someone like me." "Someone who's used to being right," she said lightly. He smiled, touché. "Ethan," her voice gentled. "What you said, it hurt at the time, yeah. But today, none of that mattered. There was a little girl crying in the middle of the street and her father couldn't get up. That's all I saw." There was a long pause between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that allowed both people to feel the gravity of the moment. "Still," he said quietly, "I needed to say it. I'm sorry, and I'm grateful, really deeply grateful." On the other end, Olivia gave a soft, almost invisible sigh, the sound of someone allowing themselves to let go of something they'd held quietly for too long. "Apology accepted," she said simply. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something shift, not just between them, but inside him. Like a door he hadn't realized was closed had finally opened. The following weeks passed in a slower rhythm than Ethan was used to, a pace not dictated by deadlines, meetings, or architectural renderings, but by the soft tick of the wall clock in his living room, the sound of Lily's pencil scratching across paper, the gentle creak of the heating pad as he shifted carefully on the couch. His doctors had been firm, no returning to work for at least 4 weeks. The spinal bruising had been serious enough to warrant physical therapy, rest, and ongoing monitoring. For a man whose identity had long been wrapped in 3D models, zoning permissions, and creative hustle, the idea of stepping away from it all had terrified him at first. But somewhere between the daily stretching routines and the quiet afternoons with Lily, something within him began to unravel, and not in a bad way. It started with the mornings. He'd wake before the alarm now, not to check emails or prep for a client call, but to make breakfast, real breakfast. Pancakes in the shape of stars or vague, misshapen attempts at stars. Scrambled eggs with too much cheese and cut-up fruit that Lily arranged in smiley faces on her plate. She would giggle, hair messy from sleep, feet swinging beneath the table. "Did you ever eat breakfast with Grandma when you were little?" she asked one morning, pouring syrup in slow zigzags. "Sometimes," Ethan said, watching her, "but not like this." After breakfast, he'd help her pack her school bag, making sure the crayon box had the colors she liked best, ensuring her sketchbook wasn't bent, and tucking a little post-it note with a doodle or joke into her lunchbox. He started walking her to school when he was well enough, even if it took twice as long as before. One afternoon, when he picked her up, she ran into his arms without hesitation. It wasn't until that moment, when she buried her face in his coat and said, "I missed you all day," that he truly understood just how absent he had been before. He also found himself saying yes more often. Yes, to staying in the school parking lot a little longer while Lily played with her friends. Yes, to visiting the local art supply store together, where she proudly chose her first set of watercolor brushes. Yes, to letting her paint on the back of his recovery pillow. "It looks better with clouds, Daddy." And during the quiet evenings, when she'd settle next to him on the couch with her feet in his lap, he would read aloud from whatever chapter book they were making their way through. Sometimes she'd fall asleep mid-story, her head resting on his side, her sketchbook open in her lap with half-finished drawings of fantastical worlds. He found himself studying those drawings the way he once studied his blueprints. Her imagination had its own architecture, one far more vivid, unpredictable, and beautiful than any building he'd ever designed. With each passing day, Ethan felt the weight of missed moments, not in a punishing way, but in a gentle, sobering one. He realized that he hadn't just been working late or saying no to school events. He had been watching his daughter grow up through the wrong lens, one where success was measured in steel and awards, instead of in laughter and presence. Now, as his back slowly healed and he moved a little more freely with each passing week, Ethan felt something else repairing itself too. Not just bone and muscle. Something deeper. Something essential. The first time Ethan and Olivia saw each other again, after the hospital call, was at the school gates, a week into his recovery. It was a sunny Thursday afternoon, the kind where autumn leaves drifted lazily through the air, and kids burst from classrooms like released balloons. Ethan stood a little awkwardly near the chain-link fence, a canvas brace still wrapped around his lower back beneath his coat. He watched as Lily came skipping out, her backpack bouncing behind her and a big grin on her face. "Daddy," she called, racing toward him. Ethan crouched just slightly, carefully, and opened his arms. "Hey, superstar, how was art today?" Before Lily could answer, another voice came from just behind her. She won the class vote, best poster for Fall Safety Week. Her scarecrow had glitter teeth. Ethan looked up and found Olivia standing a few steps away, arms crossed loosely over her chest, smiling in that quiet, slightly amused way he was beginning to recognize. "Oh, I didn't know we were weaponizing glitter now," he said with a grin. "Only in emergencies," she replied, "and school competitions." There was a pause between them, not tense but cautious, like two people navigating newly thawed ground. Lily tugged at Olivia's hand. "Can we show him the poster?" "Of course," Olivia said, and together the three of them walked into the school building. From that day on, the chance meetings came more frequently. Sometimes they'd run into each other at drop-off, both balancing coffee cups and sleepy kids. Other times it was at the school's weekend gardening program, where Olivia had been volunteering for months, and to everyone's surprise, including his own, Ethan had started showing up too. He didn't know much about plants, but Lily liked when he was there. Conversations became easier. They moved from polite hellos to inside jokes, from updates about Lily's class to trading thoughts on books, or funny patient stories Olivia would share, with all names omitted, of course. One Saturday, as they handed out juice boxes after a school cleanup day, Ethan found himself leaning against the picnic table beside her, quietly enjoying the way their rhythms aligned, unrushed, relaxed. "You're different now," Olivia said once, not accusing, just observing. "I know," he replied. "I didn't like the guy I used to be. I think I just forgot how to be a person outside of work." She nodded. "Happens to a lot of people, but not all of them find their way back." He looked at her then, not as someone who'd once seen through him, but someone who'd waited patiently, quietly, until he saw himself clearly. Some evenings, Lily would invite Olivia to join them for hot chocolate at the cafe around the corner. And sometimes Olivia said yes. They'd sit at a corner booth, Lily in the middle, sipping from a too-big mug and swinging her legs as Ethan and Olivia talked about everything and nothing. There was no declaration, no grand moment. But in each of these small, ordinary meetings, something gentle began to unfold between them. The kind of warmth that doesn't announce itself loudly, but slowly wraps around you until one day you realize it's been there all along. The transformation in Ethan wasn't sudden, but it was unmistakable, like the slow turning of a season, subtle at first, then undeniable once you stepped outside and felt the air had changed. He no longer worked late into the night. The glow of his tablet, once a permanent fixture at the dinner table or next to his bed, now remained off most evenings. Instead, he spent that time on the floor of the living room with Lily, helping her build lopsided blanket forts or listening to her animated explanations of the characters in her latest comic strip. He didn't rush her anymore. He didn't half listen. He didn't pretend. When she talked, he looked at her, really looked, and let her words sink in like they mattered, because they did. One night when Lily told him, "I like it better when you don't check your emails after dinner," he didn't make excuses. He simply said, "Me too," and meant it. At work, he scaled back his project load, something his younger self would have considered blasphemous. He delegated more, trusted his team. He even took an afternoon off to attend Lily, Parent and Me, watercolor class, walking in with sleeves rolled up, hands ready to be stained blue and green. He started showing up, not just physically but with presence, with intent. And Olivia noticed. It wasn't in grand gestures, though he tried once to thank her with a bouquet of sunflowers, only to forget she was mildly allergic. "The thought counts," she teased, eyes watery and nose red. No, the real shift was in the little things. The way he asked how her day had gone and listened without jumping in with his own. The way he offered to help pack juice boxes at a school event, even though he'd once sneered at the idea of volunteering. The way he bent down to tie Lily's shoes even when his back still ached, never once complaining. There was a moment, a quiet one, that stayed with Olivia. They were walking back from the school garden, Lily skipping ahead with a dandelion crown on her head. Olivia had been telling Ethan about a rough shift at the hospital, nothing dramatic, just exhaustion, the weight of witnessing too many people in pain. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't pivot the conversation to something easier or lighter. He simply said, "That sounds really heavy. I don't know how you carry it." And in those simple words, no platitudes, no fixing, she felt seen, respected. It was in that moment, and many others like it, that she began to truly believe his change wasn't a temporary reaction to an accident or a guilt-driven correction. It was rooted in something deeper. He was learning how to live differently, how to love differently. And Olivia, who had once written him off as distant and dismissive, now saw him as something else entirely. A man trying, earnestly and humbly, to become better, not just for his daughter but for himself. It began with stories, innocent, unfiltered, and brimming with affection. Olivia says hot chocolate tastes better when you swirl the whipped cream into little storms, Lily announced one evening as she set down her backpack and pulled out a crumpled paper from school. And she put cinnamon in hers. That's fancy, right? Ethan looked up from the stove where he was cautiously stirring pasta. Cinnamon is extremely fancy, he replied with a grin, almost royal. Lily giggled. We should invite her next time. I bet she'd draw a castle made of marshmallows. It wasn't the first time Olivia's name came up, and it wouldn't be the last. Whether it was an offhand comment during breakfast or a bedtime story that somehow morphed into, "The day Olivia helped me make a glitter mess," her name became a familiar thread woven into the fabric of their home life. Ethan didn't discourage it. In truth, he liked hearing it. He liked the softness that came into Lily's voice when she spoke of Olivia, the trust, the comfort, and he liked the way it reminded him that someone had been there when he couldn't. That someone had stepped in without hesitation and made his daughter feel safe. One Wednesday afternoon, while volunteering in Lily's art class, a new and surprisingly rewarding commitment for Ethan, he noticed her sitting quietly at the corner table, head bent in focus. She wasn't using her usual bright markers. Instead, she was working with watercolors, her tongue peeking out at the edge of her lips as she concentrated. When class ended, she handed the paper to him wordlessly. It was a painting, charming in its childlike proportions, full of bright, joyful strokes. 3 figures stood in the center. A man with brown hair, Ethan recognized his own tie. A woman with a ponytail and a pink cardigan, Olivia's signature look. And a little girl with a big smile and a flower crown. They were walking hand in hand through what looked like a park beneath a sky of swirling purples and oranges. The trees were dotted with hearts. The man held a balloon. The woman had a coffee cup. The little girl skipped between them. At the bottom, in large, slightly crooked letters, it read, "My family." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He looked over at Lily, who was already packing up her crayons. "Did you draw this today?" She nodded without looking up. "Miss Carmichael told us to draw people who make us feel happy." Ethan crouched beside her, holding the painting carefully in both hands. "It's beautiful, Lil." She paused, then glanced at him, her voice quieter than usual. "Do you think Olivia would want to see it?" He smiled, heart both swelling and aching at once. "I think she'd love it." Later that night, he sent a photo of the painting to Olivia with a simple message. "She sees something in us I hadn't let myself imagine. Maybe she's onto something." The reply came minutes later. "Tell her it's the most beautiful thing I've seen all week." And in that moment, as Ethan sat on the edge of his daughter's bed watching her drift off to sleep, the painting resting on her nightstand like a quiet hope, he realized that love doesn't always arrive in declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes, it begins in the space between 3 figures on a piece of paper, hand in hand, walking toward something new. Their conversations deepened quietly, almost without either of them realizing it. What began as friendly small talk at school pickups or quick exchanges over text about Lily's after-school schedule gradually shifted into something more intimate, more vulnerable, something neither of them tried to force, but both began to lean into with growing comfort. It started one rainy evening, when Ethan dropped Lily off at Olivia's place for a quick playdate while he attended a short physical therapy session nearby. When he came to pick her up, Lily had fallen asleep on Olivia's couch, curled up in a fleece blanket, her head resting on a stuffed giraffe that Olivia had somehow procured just for her. "I was going to wake her, but she looked too peaceful," Olivia whispered, handing him a cup of tea instead. They sat at the small table near her kitchen, rain pattering against the window like soft punctuation between their words. Ethan traced a fingertip along the rim of his mug. "I used to think slowing down was a weakness," he admitted, "that if I stopped moving, I'd fall apart. After my wife passed, I think I convinced myself that work was the only thing I could control." Olivia didn't interrupt. She just listened, her hands wrapped around her own mug, eyes steady. "I wasn't present for anyone," he continued. "Not for Lily, not for myself. I barely remembered to eat. I'd stare at building plans like they could fix the hole I was in." He looked up, a flicker of shame in his voice. "You probably saw it. I don't blame you for thinking I was a cold bastard." Olivia gave a small smile, her voice calm and unjudging. "I saw a man trying to survive in the only way he knew how. Doesn't mean I agreed with you, but I've worked with enough people in crisis to know that pain doesn't always look like tears." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing past the worst of me." She shrugged gently. "I didn't say I saw past it, I just didn't walk away from it." They both laughed, and something eased between them. A shared acknowledgement of the past, yes, but also a sense of present trust. After that night, more conversations followed. Sometimes it was while walking Lily home from school together, their steps falling in rhythm on tree-lined sidewalks. Other times, it was on Olivia's balcony, after Lily had fallen asleep during a movie night, the two of them sharing a blanket and a bottle of wine under the soft glow of string lights. They talked about everything. Olivia shared stories from the hospital, funny, tragic, absurd. She spoke of burnout, of moments when she questioned if she was helping anyone at all. Ethan, in turn, told her about the pressure of designing for people he never got to meet, of feeling disconnected from the very communities his buildings were supposed to serve. They talked about parenthood, its guilt, its beauty, its quiet miracles. They talked about grief. They talked about hope. And though neither said it aloud, they both began to feel a shift, something tender growing between the lines. No sudden sparks, no cinematic tension, just a warmth that grew steadily, like light creeping into a room through curtains left open just a little wider each day. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench in the park watching Lily chase pigeons, Olivia turned to him and said softly, "You know, for someone who once thought glitter was a waste of time, you've become surprisingly open to chaos." Ethan chuckled, resting his arm on the back of the bench. "Turns out chaos has its charm." And when their hands brushed, neither of them pulled away. Lily's 7th birthday fell on a crisp Saturday in late spring, the kind of day where the air felt new and the sky seemed to stretch just a little wider than usual. For weeks, she had talked about it with the breathless excitement only children possess, switching her theme idea every few days. A unicorn tea party turned into an underwater jungle, which somehow became outer space, but with cats. In the end, the chosen theme, settled after much negotiation and a generous dose of Olivia's calm reasoning, was Galaxy Garden, a whimsical mix of stars, planets, and flowers. Ethan had never heard of such a thing before, but he quickly learned that with enough glitter, black tablecloths, and helium balloons shaped like Saturn, anything was possible. Planning the party became something more than just an event. It was an unspoken project that brought Ethan and Olivia closer in a way that felt natural and almost, somehow, inevitable. They spent evenings side by side at Olivia's kitchen table, making galaxy-themed party favors, cutting out cardboard stars, and helping Lily bake her own cupcakes, each one uniquely chaotic, some with googly eyes stuck on the frosting. Olivia had a talent for turning small details into magic, stringing fairy lights through mason jars, finding just the right playlist that blended whimsical space music with pop songs Lily loved. Ethan, for his part, surprised them both. He took the lead on building a DIY photo booth shaped like a spaceship, complete with blinking lights and a cardboard control panel. He even learned how to make punch that shimmered with edible glitter. Lily declared it the best potion ever. On the day of the party, the backyard of Olivia's apartment, shared with a few other tenants, was transformed. Paper lanterns floated above like small moons, and silver streamers fluttered from the fences. Children ran wild with sparkly antennas on their heads, their shoes lighting up as they darted through makeshift asteroid fields made from painted foam balls. Ethan stood by the snack table, placing the finishing touches on a sign that read "Welcome to Lily's Galaxy Garden," when Olivia came over, brushing cupcake crumbs from her sleeve. "She's glowing," she said softly, watching Lily twirl in a star-covered cape someone had gifted her. "She is," Ethan agreed, his voice warm. Then after a pause he added, "So are you." Olivia glanced at him, surprised, maybe even a little flustered. "Me? I've got frosting in my hair and probably glitter on my teeth." He smiled, "Exactly." She laughed, and in that moment, surrounded by laughter, balloons, and the scent of vanilla and sunlight, it struck both of them how easy this had all begun to feel. As the party wound down and parents came to collect their children, Lily stayed close to the two of them, sticky-fingered and joyful, clutching a bouquet of balloons like a prize. She reached up and took both their hands in hers. "Best birthday ever," she declared. And neither Ethan nor Olivia corrected her, because it wasn't just Lily's day that had been special. It had been a celebration of something else, too, something blooming between the three of them, slow and sure and real. Something that didn't need to be named yet because it was already understood. Later, after the last cupcake had been packed away and Lily had fallen asleep in Olivia's bed, the two of them stood in the quiet kitchen with mugs of tea and tired smiles. "Would you do this again next year?" Olivia asked teasingly. Ethan leaned back against the counter, looking at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he said, "I think I'd do this again every year." And the way Olivia looked at him then, half amused, half something far softer, told him she just might feel the same. It came on suddenly, just a low-grade fever and a sore throat at first. But by the end of the day, Olivia was bundled on her couch under two blankets, her nose red, her voice gone raspy, and her energy drained to almost nothing. She rarely got sick. 12-hour shifts at the hospital had built her immunity like a fortress, but every now and then the exhaustion slipped through the cracks. This time, it hit hard. She had sent Ethan a quick message. "Can't make it to Lily's art show tonight. Feel awful. Give her a big hug for me." He replied immediately. "Don't worry about it. I'll take photos. Do you need anything?" She almost said no. She almost added a joking, "Just a new immune system, thanks." But she didn't have the energy. Instead, she sent a thumbs-up emoji and put her phone down, letting herself doze in the dim quiet of her apartment. A couple of hours later, a soft knock came at the door. Groggy and wrapped in a blanket like a burrito, she shuffled over and opened it just a crack, only to find Ethan standing there, holding a paper bag in one hand and a bottle of orange juice in the other. "You look like a slightly glamorous ghost," he said with a smirk. Olivia blinked. "What are you doing here?" she rasped. He lifted the bag. Soup, tea, actual medicine, and a lemon that looked judgmental enough to remind you to hydrate. Despite her stuffy nose and headache, she laughed, an honest, surprised laugh that felt like sunlight cracking through a fog. "I didn't ask you to come." "I know," he said simply. "You would have said no even if you needed help, so I just showed up." He stepped inside without making it a big deal, placing everything gently on the kitchen counter, like he'd done this 100 times. He moved through the space with quiet confidence, boiling water for tea, pouring juice into a glass, even tucking a clean blanket over the back of the couch. "I can manage, you know," she said, watching him with bleary eyes from her perch on the couch. "I know," he said again, kneeling beside the coffee table to hand her the mug, "but you shouldn't have to, at least not alone. Not today." Olivia stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable, her defenses softening in the glow of lamplight and herbal tea steam. This wasn't the man who once dismissed her work with a shrug. This wasn't the distant parent lost in his own ambitions. This was someone who had learned how to care, not just in grand gestures, but in the small, steady kind. The kind that showed up when no one asked. The kind that sat beside you when you were at your worst and never made you feel like a burden. "I'm not great at letting people take care of me," she said quietly. Ethan smiled, his voice low and warm. "I wasn't great at doing it either. Took me a while to figure it out." She studied him then, really looked. And something shifted, not a sudden realization, but the gentle tilt of emotion falling into place. "Thank you," she said, softer than a whisper. He nodded, "Any time." As the tea cooled in her hands and the fever slowly began to ebb, Olivia realized something with quiet clarity. The man sitting across from her now wasn't someone she had merely forgiven. He was someone she had come to trust. The leaves had begun to turn. Golden reds and soft ambers floated on the surface of Lake Union like scattered memories. It was a crisp, wind-brushed evening in mid-autumn, the kind where breath fogs in the air and everything feels a little quieter, a little closer to the heart. Ethan had asked Olivia to take a walk with him after dinner, a simple, quiet request she hadn't questioned. Lily was spending the night at her grandma, and the city felt unusually still, like it, too, was holding its breath for something unspoken. They walked along the lake's edge, their footsteps falling in sync. The last light of the day skimmed across the water, catching the outlines of docked sailboats and the distant sparkle of downtown Seattle. Olivia wrapped her scarf tighter, glancing at Ethan as he slowed near a bench overlooking the water. He didn't sit. Instead, he turned to her and took a breath, the kind that steadies everything inside you before something big. Then, from his coat pocket, he pulled out a rolled piece of sketch paper tied with a deep blue ribbon. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Something I've been working on for a while," he said, offering it to her with a faint smile. "Not for a client, not for a competition, just for us." She untied the ribbon and unrolled the paper carefully, eyes scanning the pencil lines with growing wonder. It was a house, a small one, modest in scale but rich in detail and warmth, a wide front porch, big windows, an art nook by the back wall, a cozy loft under the roofline with stars drawn across the ceiling. Every element was intentional, familiar. Every line spoke to the life they'd begun building, slowly, quietly, without even realizing it. He watched her closely, his voice quieter now. "It's not just a house," he said. "It's the place I imagine coming home to, with you, with Lily, a space where we can keep growing, together." Olivia blinked, still taking it in. The sketch trembled slightly in her hands. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've spent years designing spaces for other people, buildings that impress, that endure. But this is the first one that feels like home, and the only one I can't imagine without you in it." Then he reached into his pocket once more and pulled out a small box, simple, unadorned. He opened it slowly, revealing a ring, not extravagant but elegant, thoughtful. A single stone with a delicate twist of silver, like a curve drawn by a steady hand. "Olivia," he said, voice low and full, "I love who I've become around you. I love who we've become. Will you marry me? Will you be part of this little life we're building, with Lily, with me, with all of it?" She stood frozen for a moment, the sketch still open in one hand, her heart catching in her throat. Then slowly she looked up at him, and her eyes shimmered with something deep and certain. Yes, she whispered, tears brimming. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, laughing through the emotion that threatened to break him. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when they kissed, soft, slow, grounding, it was with the ease of something long in the making. Behind them, the city lights reflected off the lake like stars scattered on water. And in that quiet corner of Seattle, beneath the rustling leaves and the open sky, a promise was made, not grand, not loud, but wholly, irrevocably real. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes as she stared at the ring, the weight of the moment settling into her chest like a soft, overwhelming ache. For so long she had been guarding her heart, protecting it from more loss, from more pain. But standing there in the quiet of the evening with Ethan's gaze steady on hers, something inside her shifted. It was as if all the walls she'd built had finally come down, not in fear, but in the quiet relief of knowing she wasn't alone anymore. She looked up at him, her breath unsteady. "Ethan," she whispered, barely able to speak through the raw emotion in her throat. "I." The words caught, but she didn't need to finish. He stepped closer, his hand finding hers, the warmth of it grounding her. "Yes," she said finally, a soft, broken smile forming on her lips. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll build this life with you." Her voice trembled with the enormity of what she was saying, but it was the truth, spoken from a place deep within her that had never felt more certain. Ethan's eyes filled with relief and joy, his own tears glistening as he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. He didn't need to say anything. The hug was enough. His arms wrapped around her with the kind of tenderness that told her everything. Every moment of pain, every struggle, every lonely night had led to this. They stood there for what felt like forever, holding each other in the fading light of day, the world around them quiet except for the steady rhythm of their hearts. When they finally pulled back, Olivia reached up to touch his face, her fingers brushing away the stray tear that had slipped down his cheek. She smiled softly, her voice barely a whisper. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Ethan nodded, his thumb brushing her cheek. "A long way, but I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." They stood there for a moment longer, the wind rustling the leaves above them, the glow from the city twinkling in the distance. In that peaceful silence, they knew without a doubt that every difficulty, every heartache, every misstep along the way had been worth it, because it had brought them here together. As they turned to walk back toward the car, their hands entwined, the future felt full of possibilities. And though they both knew there would still be challenges ahead, it didn't matter anymore. They had each other, and that was enough. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the bustling streets of Seattle. The air was warm, laced with the scent of popcorn and kettle corn, mingling with the distant sounds of music and laughter. It was the perfect evening for the annual summer festival, an event that marked the heart of the city's vibrant spirit. Ethan, Olivia, and Lily moved through the crowd together, their hands tightly linked. The world around them was alive with color and sound. Children darted between booths, couples strolled hand in hand, and the hum of chatter and live music filled the air. Yet, in that moment, everything else seemed distant, fading away as they focused on each other. Lily bounced between them, her face alight with excitement as she pointed out every new booth, every colorful balloon. She tugged on Ethan's sleeve, asking if they could try the Ferris wheel, and he, of course, agreed with a laugh. "I've never been on a Ferris wheel before," Lily exclaimed. "Will we see the whole city?" "I think we'll see the whole world," Ethan replied, crouching down to her level with a wink. "But we'll make sure to wave at the stars when we get up high." Olivia smiled, watching them with a soft, warm affection. Her heart swelled with the simple joy of seeing them both so happy. The memories of earlier years, of uncertainty and fear, seemed like distant shadows now. The journey they had all been on, with its twists and turns, had led them here, to this place of quiet happiness. Together, as they walked toward the Ferris wheel, Olivia's fingers brushed Ethan's, a quiet reminder of how far they'd come. He met her gaze, and in that brief moment, she saw the same thought reflected in his eyes, the same understanding of what this journey had cost and what it had given them. The ride up the Ferris wheel was a quiet moment of awe. From the top, the city spread out before them in a beautiful mosaic of lights and colors. The lake shimmered beneath the fading sun, and the skyline stretched beyond the horizon, vast and full of possibility. "We're all the way up," Lily gasped, clutching the rail. "This is like a dream." Ethan pulled her close, his arm around her. "And we're just getting started." As the wheel slowly descended, they were quiet for a moment, taking in the view, the family they had become, the love that had woven itself so deeply into their lives. It was a new chapter, one they would write together, hand in hand as they always had. They disembarked with smiles, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the festival. Lanterns twinkled above them like stars, and the warmth of the summer night wrapped around them like a promise. Ethan, Olivia, and Lily walked through the crowd, savoring the simple joy of being together, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, they had already built something beautiful, something lasting. In that moment, as they strolled between the festival lights, they didn't need anything more than each other. Their hearts, full of love and gratitude, beat in unison. They had arrived, and the future, full of love and laughter, awaited them together.